Hello, my name is Rochelle, and the chapter I chose out of the book, The Psychology of Emotion in Restorative Practice, written by Vernon T. Kelly and Margaret Thorburn, was chapter 7. So I chose chapter 7, which was titled Keep Calm, Carry On from Fear to Fun over 2 years in a British youth arts organization. So in this chapter, Cyan Williams, she documents her professional experience as an employee in a British youth arts organization. And she was responsible for the emotional, spiritual, and social support or the pastoral care of the participants in this organization. Now, she was recruited by the newly hired director of this organization because the director wanted the nature of the organization or the culture of the organization to be more restorative, to be more restorative. So Williams, she had a background in developing restorative practices in schools where the population of students was of a lower socioeconomic status and had a fairly low level of emotional literacy. But before, and restorative practices is basically the theory, the practice of building relationships, healthy relationships, to make it short and sweet. So William had a background in developing restorative practices in schools where the population of students was of a lower socioeconomic status and they had a fairly low level of emotional literacy. Now, before we go any further, I just want to talk a little bit more about the affect script psychology. So what that is a framework that explains how emotions shape human behavior, and repeated emotional experiences form what they call scripts. And these scripts influence your future responses. Now, you can develop positive or negative scripts. Like, for example, if a child is learning to read and anytime they fumble a word, they are harshly reprimanded, over time, they will display fear and avoidance when faced with the reading task. But on the flip side, if that student is encouraged to keep trying and they are worked with, then they will have a positive outlook on learning, possibly taking it on as a challenge, and they are more likely to persevere and keep trying. So that is just in a nutshell affect script psychology. Now, there are 9 affects, okay, of the of this framework. And so some of the positive affects are enjoyment or joy. They are interest and excitement. They are surprise and startle, which is a neutral effect. Now, there are more negative effects than there are positive and neutral, which I find interesting. So the negative effects are shame and humiliation, distress and anguish, fear and terror, anger, rage, disgust, and dismay. Okay? And so these are the various affects of the framework of affect script psychology. So during her observations, Williams, when she first got there and she began to observe the students, she noticed that the relationships were pretty cliquey, and the relationships, they seem to exist on an inferiority and superiority axis, And it was reported by staff that many of the youth felt inferior to others. And there were a lot of negative affects, okay? And the chart that I'm showing, that I've showed, is from chapter 1 of the same book on page 27, okay? Now, when she focused on the relationships between the staff and the participants, William noticed that there was a respect for the professional tutors, but less for the support team and the core staff. And she judged relationships between staff and participants by the metrics of the social discipline window. Okay. Now, this is a figure from page 57 of the social discipline window. And what that is, it is a framework that has 4 quadrants, and the 4 quadrants represents different combinations of control and support. So just a quick overview, you have high control plus low support. When those come together, you get more of a punitive reaction. Now, this approach focuses on strict rules and discipline with little emotional support, and it can lead to fear and resentment. So then you have low control accompanied with low support, and that will yield you a neglectful benefits. Now here, there's neither strong discipline or support. So this approach can result in chaos and a lack of structure. So then you have low control and high support, which is permissive. And this quadrant offers a lot of emotional support, but it lacks discipline. And it can result in individuals not having clear boundaries. So then finally, you have high control plus high support, and that is when you start being restorative. And this is the ideal approach in restorative practices. So it combines strong discipline with emotional support. It encourages accountability while also providing the necessary support to improve behavior and relationships. So Williams used the social discipline window as a guide when she went to restructure the staff, which was her first step in implementing the restorative practices at the youth program. So after she took a good look at the staff that were there, she got rid of the staff that she felt were not operating in the restorative box or the with box, and she kept those that were, because she realized that the staff were operating in all 4 quadrants of the social discipline window, but it was dominated by the negative affects and the negative emotions. So she kept those that were willing to work in the with box or the high control, high support box, and then she replaced those that did not or were not willing to work in those quadrants. Now, once she identified the relationships between the students, which she said, they were cliquey and they were on a inferiority, superiority scale. And then she identified the relationships between the students and the staff, which, they respected, the professional staff, but then they did not have as much respect for like the support core staff. So like I said, first step was restructuring the staff. And so she did that using the social discipline window, keeping those that were operating in the with and replacing those that were not. Now, the new staff began to model restorative relationships. They used restorative language, for example, using 6 key restorative questions. And those restorative questions are: what happened? What were you thinking when said situation happened? What have you thought about since? Who has been affected and how? And what needs to happen in order to fix things? Like, how can we make sure this doesn't happen in the future? So the goal of using the restorative language was to empower the youth to take ownership of minor problems, because she witnessed a lot of learned helplessness. And this learned helplessness came from staff operating in the 4 quadrant, okay, of the social discipline window. And that is doing things for a person. So she addressed this with restorative language. She would ask restorative questions about what needs to happen to fix this. And when a minor issue occurred, the staff would gauge how much support the students needed, but allowed them to come up with their own solution. So this allowed the students and staff to then use the same restorative language for even bigger issues. Now, once she restructured the staff and implemented the restorative language, she then set up a system to promote responsibility and ownership. So during her first year, she set up a group. To deal with issues that would have what she called a quick win. And the example she gave was like bedtime and break arrangements. You know, these are things that you can quickly discuss amongst your peers and come up with a quick solution that everybody would be in agreement with. Now, she also put together problem-solving training as well. And because she observed a lot of low-level verbal bullying, which contributed to the negative effects, she also put together a group that would develop new anti-bullying policies. And in addition to, she added a buddy system. And this came about during her second year. She added the buddy system. And these teams of buddies, they would take responsibility for new members to help them easily assimilate into the culture of the organization. And so that way, when the new participants came, they, didn't have as much anxiety, and some of those negative affect feelings would be decreased because they would have a buddy there to kind of walk them through and introduce them to the culture of the organization. So those were just a few things that she implemented in her year 1 and year 2 of her being head of the pastoral care of the youth. Now, after she determined the harm, implemented the restorative language, got the proper staff on board, and like I said, she came up with these 2 systems. These aren't the only 2, but these were the 2 that were kind of highlighted the most. And so she went on to repair the relationships amongst the participants. And so she used many restorative conferences for less serious issues that didn't require parents or staff to solve the issue. And she used the same process for repairing relationships between staff and students. Now, for rebuilding the relationships, she used full restorative conferences when she was rebuilding relationships for the between the staff and the students. So in figure 7.4, which is found on page 174, it kind of sums up the progress that was made after her first year. So after the first year, the negative affects of fear, anger, distress, dismay, disgust, and shame, those became less common. And the positive affects of interest and enjoyment started to be the norm. So by year 2, the whole mood of the residentials was calmer and lighter. There was more stimuli provoking positive affects, which turned into positive emotions, and over time, positive scripts, which meant that because they had these positive affects that and positive emotions, whenever they were faced with similar situations in the future, they were positive about those situations because they had formed positive scripts in the past. Now, so ultimately, through the restorative practice, Williams, she was able to positively change the culture of the organization, and that even continued after her departure. And so, although she states that, of course, they stumbled along the way, they made some mistakes along the way, but they stuck to the program, they trusted the process, and they were able to change the culture to a restorative culture at this British youth organization. So thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to hearing your responses.